Hello there. Welcome to this week's episode of Did Shakespeare? My name is Cassidy Cash, that's Shakespeare Girl. And this week we're asking the question, did Shakespeare have grandkids? As a matter of fact, Shakespeare did have grandkids. He had a total of 4 grandchildren. Now, the one you're going to hear the most about if you look up Shakespeare's granddaughter seems to be Elizabeth Hall. Now, we should start by telling you a little about Shakespeare's family. William Shakespeare was married to Anne Hathaway, and they had 3 children. They had a set of twins, Judith and Hamnet, and they also had a daughter, Susanna. Susanna was born first, and then Judith and Hamnet were born later. Hamnet would die at 11 years old, presumably from the plague. They're really not sure, and the story of his death we'll have to cover in a different lesson. Today, I want to talk to you about the kids of Susanna and Judith. Now, Elizabeth is Susanna's daughter, and she's considered Shakespeare's last direct descendant. Judith had 3 kids, Richard, Shakespeare, and Thomas. Those are the first names of her 3 sons. Elizabeth was the only granddaughter Shakespeare himself, William Shakespeare, would have known personally, because all of the other grandchildren were born after Shakespeare died in 1616. But here's what we know about Elizabeth. She was born to Susanna and John Hall. John Hall was a doctor. Elizabeth was married twice. She married Thomas Nash, and then later she would marry a man by the name of Bernard. Now, I've seen it spelled Bernard with an E and Bernard with an A. So B-A-N-A-R-D, but I've also seen it spelled B-E-N-A-R-D. I tried to find a reliable source that would tell me the correct spelling, and I wasn't able to find one. The closest I came, and the one I think I'm going to go with, is ShakespeareDocumented.org. Has a lot of parish records and digital copies of real paper documents from Shakespeare's time. It has copies of his will and Susanna's will and Elizabeth's will, and they spell her name B-A-N-A-R-D. So I think that's what's correct. But if you read on like Wikipedia or somewhere like that, you're going to see it spelled another way. If I haven't said this before, you should hear it now. When you're reading Wikipedia, it's a great place to get what I call starter information of like research launching points, but you should consider them research launching points of, okay, Wikipedia said this, now we have to go see if we can find something to either refute or corroborate that statement, which was how I came about to finding Elizabeth Bernard on Shakespeare Documented, because I started out at Wikipedia looking up her name and her history, because Wikipedia does do a good job of taking a lot of history and condensing it down into something that's quickly readable. And so when I'm compiling these lessons, I try to get the fastest path to the information for you guys. And so Wikipedia is great for that, but Shakespeare Documented is a much more historically accurate and reliable place to get information if you want to really delve into the life of Elizabeth Hall and learn about her more in depth. That would be a great place to do that. It's just going to be a lot of reading, and so take that for what it is. But the other things that we know about Elizabeth are that she didn't have any children. A fun fact about her is that Abington Park, which is part of the, I believe it's Northampton Museum. Abington Park is basically the house that she used to own, and you can go and see it still today. It is, I'll put a link to the exact name and place of how to go and see this in the show notes. When I looked it up to tell you about it today, it is closed right now. They're doing a major renovation project over there, and they're not planning on opening that museum again until the late in the year of 2019. So not this year, not next year, but I assume it will reopen again in 2020 after they complete these renovations. Right now, the museum that Abington Park is a part of is being used as an art museum. Their main website doesn't talk a lot about Abington Park. I don't know if it's not a popular tourist location or if it's just not well known that this was Shakespeare's granddaughter's home, but it was. And she lived there. It was largely torn down and rebuilt in about, I think the year was 1678. There was a man named William Thursby who owned it, and he tore down most of it and rebuilt it. And so a lot of the directly tied to Shakespeare history got destroyed or replaced when he was doing that. But the building is still there, and it was her place, so that is still something you can visit there today. I should clarify, I made a mistake. I said this incorrectly. I said that Elizabeth did not have any children. It wasn't that she didn't have them, it's that the ones she had died before she did. She actually gave birth to 8 children, but they all died before she did. So she didn't have any descendants who outlived her, and they didn't grow up to have their own children. So we should make that clarification. Elizabeth was closely associated with the Royalists during the English Civil War, and her and both of her husbands were staunch supporters of Charles I. In fact, the Queen, Henrietta Maria, stayed with Elizabeth and her husband at New Place. After her husband that had stayed with her and the Queen, that was Thomas Nash, Elizabeth's first husband, stayed with the Queen at New Place. Now, after Thomas Nash died, 18 months later, she married John Bernard. And after the Restoration in 1660, John Bernard was knighted, and they became Sir John and Lady Bernard. And there is a portrait believed to be of Elizabeth Bernard that is titled Portrait of Lady Bernard. So her social status improved dramatically with her second marriage. Elizabeth must have been very fond of Stratford because shortly after she married John Bernard, her mom, Susanna, died and left the Shakespeare properties to her. And at that time, Elizabeth and her husband, John Bernard, relocated to Stratford to live at New Place. Now, I mentioned that Elizabeth was not Shakespeare's only grandchild. He did have 3 others. Judith's son, Shakespeare, who she named after her father, died when he was just 6 months old. Richard lived to be 21, and Thomas, who was about 3 years younger than Richard, would die the same year Richard did, and they think Richard and Thomas both died of plague in 1639. That's why Elizabeth is labeled as the last descendant of William Shakespeare, is because she outlived everyone. Judith had children, and so did Susanna, but Elizabeth lived the longest. Elizabeth was the last Shakespeare to die, and since she didn't have any children, and Judith's children didn't produce any heirs either, there are no more Shakespeares. That'll do it for this week here at Did Shakespeare. We hope you enjoyed learning about Shakespeare's grandchildren and all the different ways that you can get to know them. Another website I do want to tell you about, in addition to Shakespeare Documented, is Shakespeares England. It appears to have stopped being updated around 2014, so it is kind of old, but it has some good pictures of Elizabeth Hall and of Lady Bernard and the portrait that I referenced, as well as pictures of Abington Park and some of the history behind that house. So I'll place a link to that in the show notes as well, but do know that I don't think that website is active. If you are connected with shakespearesengland.co.uk, please let me know if I'm wrong about this, because your website's very neat. It's just they have a copyright notice at the bottom that says it's only copyrighted through 2014, and none of the articles seem to have been written sooner than that. This one that I'm going to link you to is actually from 2012. So anyway, go check that out. It's got some fun pictures, and we'll put other fun links in the show notes for you there. So you can learn more about Elizabeth Hall, as well as Richard Thomas and Shakespeare Quiney. I'm glad that you were here. It was fun talking with you about Shakespeare's grandkids. I will be back next Saturday with another video asking, did Shakespeare? So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. Liking and subscribing YouTube videos helps this information reach more people. And there are lots of people who would want to learn about Shakespeare, and we want to make sure they get to learn it with us because you're a cool person and I like to talk about Shakespeare. So there you go. As always, there's lots of fun conversations that happens after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Go to CassidyCash.com for free downloads and more fun Shakespeare stuff. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.